When the Steam Deck was originally launched, it made waves, not only in the PC space, but outside of it as well. There were people that were playing mainly on the Nintendo Switch that loved the handheld form factor, but wanted more power. They wanted something that wasn't running on something that was 6, 7, or 8 years old on a handheld. That's where the Steam Deck came into play. And the beautiful thing about it is that Valve used SteamOS to make a much more user-friendly front end for that handheld. It does offer the flexibility of using all the Linux side of things if you wanted to, but having that front end made it awesome. Now, I did a recent video somewhere up here or up there where I talk about the pros and cons of the Steam Deck and why I still feel like it's best for most people. Obviously, there's a subsect of people that are interested in getting the most performance out of a handheld as possible, and they just want to be able to play their games with the highest frame rate and the highest resolution, as well as the highest refresh rate. Now, when it comes down to it, if you want that, I probably wouldn't recommend a Steam Deck at this point, at the time of this recording. I would recommend one of the other AMD handhelds that are out there, like the ROG Ally X or the ROG Ally or the Legion Go from Lenovo. Those handhelds just perform better overall, simply because of the fact that it's newer hardware. The Z1 Extreme chipset is just honestly awesome. It's able to give you a 10 to 20%, if not more, lift in performance than you would get on the Steam Deck. Now, if you want to have the best of both worlds, the best of SteamOS and the best of Windows, then you would get an ROG Ally or any of the other AMD-based handhelds that I talked about and install Bazzite on there. Now, without getting too deep or technical into it, BazziteOS is essentially a desktop environment for Linux that creates almost a Steam-like experience or SteamOS-like experience. You're going to be getting the hardware, the performance that you would get with a Z1 Extreme chipset with the OS of the Steam Deck. It's the best of both worlds. And there's a way that you can set it up to where you can either boot into SteamOS or BazziteOS, or if you want to, you can boot into Windows with a click of a button. There's no going into BIOS or anything like that. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the entire process of installing BazziteOS and doing the partition that you need, as well as the script that you need for Linux in order to boot into either or. Now, I have timestamps down below, so you can jump to and from whatever you need to go ahead and check out for yourself, as well as affiliate links down below if you need something to make this happen for yourself. Technically, you don't really need much else aside from the SSD that's there, but for me personally, I just decided to double the space anyways, because if I'm going to be doing all of this work, I might as well make it worth my time and double the hard drive space. That way I can just, install as many games as I want on here to play on the go. But aside from that, I do want to go ahead and take into account the fact that with Linux and Windows, there are a lot of programs that run on both. And Windows isn't exactly the safest OS out there. It is the most popular. It's much more popular than Linux. It's much more popular than iOS or Mac OS, simply because of the fact that it is just out there. Windows is just out there all the time. Since it's a larger user base, you're more prone to attacks or any sort of Trojans or viruses or whatever it may be. And today's sponsor works on both Linux and Windows to protect you from all of that stuff. All right, I'll be honest with you guys. When NordVPN reached out to me, I thought that it was going to be a basic VPN and I would just, check it out, poke abroad and call it a day. But the more that I started using the service, the more that I started getting familiar with the software, the more that I realized that this isn't just a basic VPN. Like, yes, you do have the VPN service where it's like, oh, your internet is protected and yeah, you can change where you're located and things like that. But there are a ton of other things that are here. For example, like I travel a lot. So one of the things that I like to do is sometimes I like to watch content when I'm abroad, but there's firewalls on some of these services that prevent VPNs from logging in. There's this thing called obfuscated servers. And what that means is that you can use and have all of the benefits of having a VPN, but you can log in and get past those firewalls and still access the content. It's honestly awesome. It blew my mind. Now, obviously there's other things here like a double VPN or an onion VPN. Like there's other things too, aside from using just a VPN and the services and combinations that's there. There's a Threat Protection Pro service that's built in that has nothing to do with being connected to their VPN. For example, you can go ahead and have malware protection, which means that the app will protect you from, from downloading files that would harm your computer and steal your data. It also protects you from websites that are known for phishing, scams, malware, and There's a tracker and ad blocker. That means that you don't have to worry about any sort of web tracking or ads that pop up based on your search or surf history. More importantly, if by any chance there's a data leak or data breach of any kind, you can scan the dark web to see if there's any data that's out there that's associated to phone numbers, to emails, addresses, any sort of personal information. You can see if it's out there and take action. Now, if you're ready to not only protect your browsing, but pretty much anything and everything that you do, follow the link down in the description below. I'll have it on the screen right over here to get NordVPN. Try it out. It's 30 days. There's a money back guarantee that you can go ahead and check out. But if you get that 2-year plan, you'll get an additional 4 months included. So follow the link in the description below, as well as the pinned comment. And thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. All right, now that some bills have been paid, we can talk about the things that you need in order to actually install BazziteOS onto your Ally X or any other AMD-based handheld. Now, first and foremost, I would recommend a wireless keyboard of some kind, and particularly one that has a USB dongle of some kind. That way you can connect it right into the Ally X as you're using it. This particular one I primarily use just for the fact that it has a keyboard, but then I started using this and I realized that the touchpad is super sensitive. So I ended up doing a quick, 4-hour order on Amazon of this guy. This is the Rex 8, and it does a really good job. Honestly, it behaves just like a normal touchpad over here. There's no crazy sensitivity like this one. So I'll have a link down below to all of the stuff that I'm going to talk about over here. That way you can get prepped up for your installation as well. Now, I do recommend using a USB-A to USB-C dongle in order to actually use your USB drive. Now, this is a 128 gigabyte drive. You don't need something that big. Honestly, you'd be fine with a minimum of 10 gigabytes. That's what Universal Blue, the team behind BazziteOS, recommends. But if you get one that has USB-A in order to connect, then I would recommend using an adapter of some kind. If you are using adapters, one thing that I realized was that when I was connecting these, there isn't that much space up here in order to use 2 different adapters for USB-A drives. So I ended up using this dongle, which is overkill. This is, has like a ton of like different ports and a ton of different things. You don't need this. I'll have a link down below. I'll have a link for this, but I'll have a link down below to something else that I found that will do the job just fine, that is way less expensive than this. One thing that I do recommend is that if you are going to be, getting in here and doing all this stuff, increase your capacity. Like, I doubled the size. That way I have 1 terabyte for Windows and 1 terabyte for Steam. I might change the partition later on, but in terms of everything, it's just easier. It's better that way. I like it. And that way you have a fresh install. You don't have to worry about things. I do also have a microSD card that's here. That way, I have games that are running that are applicable towards both partitions. So if I wanted to use Windows and play the games that are there that I already have downloaded that I've been using on Steam, it'll work just fine. And I'll show you a little bit about that later on in the video. Also, in order to get this entire job done, I am using this kit from iFixit. Now, this is overkill, like 100% overkill, because it comes with all of the, doodads and everything that I would need in order to do pretty much any job. But primarily, all you need for this are guitar picks like this, which you can honestly find at like Sam Ash or Guitar Center if you have one nearby, and then the bits that are here, to the screwdriver in order to get things going. Now, if you go to Guitar Center and you get a guitar pick and you just get the cheaper version of this that just comes with the screwdriver as well as a couple bits, you'll be fine. You don't need anything like this. I just have this because of all the stuff that I do. I will have links down below to that version as well as other ones, but that's all you need in order to get this job going. Now, in order to get your ROG Ally X's SSD ready for everything, I would first go into privacy and security and decrypt your hard drive. Depending on, how many things are here and everything like that, it might take longer than not. It took me roughly about 15 minutes for this to happen. So I literally just toggled it off and it just started decrypting everything. Once everything's decrypted, from there, we can go into the actual removal of the SSD. To install the SSD onto the ROG Ally X, I made sure that I had an anti-static mat, but I also made sure that I had something to hold the front of the Ally X. Now, I used this mod case from JSO. I just took the cover off and I placed my Ally X in there, but honestly, you could use like a towel or maybe even a piece of a cardboard box or something. And I also used the actual box of the SSD to make sure that it was nice and stable and it didn't move to and from as I worked on the SSD itself. All right, before you actually swap things out, there are a couple of things to to keep in mind. First and foremost, there are 6 screws that are there on the back cover. All of them are loosened out, but there is only one that stays in place or a part of that back cover, and that is the bottom center. The bottom left and right and the entire top row, all of those screws you can actually remove and take out and just put aside. Also, as you're removing that back cover using that guitar pick, make sure that you don't accidentally turn on the Windows handheld like me. Make sure that you're careful with that power button. Also, you want to make sure that you're careful with that ribbon wire, because there's a ribbon wire that connects the back cover to the motherboard that's there. Yanking that out might accidentally break it or rip it, and then you're kind of screwed. So just be careful with that. When you finally have access to the PCB and everything that's there, you want to make sure that you unplug that battery that's there. It's very easy to do. All you have to do is just unloosen the connector and just lift it up. If you have a piece of plastic or something that isn't electric or electric inducing, then use that. I recommend just removing that just to, be safe. Then after that, you can just remove the SSD and swap out the one that's there. In terms of whether or not you should use a heatsink or something like that, I don't really see the need of it personally. I would reach out to ASUS just in case, but as far as I can tell, if the one that's already there doesn't have one, then I don't see the need for having one anyways, so keep that in mind. Once you go ahead and swap that in, do the exact opposite of what you did to go in, screw everything back as it should, pop everything back in place, and then we can go on to the next step. Once everything is put back together, we need to start the Ally X or turn it on. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that there's a power supply of some kind connected to it. After that is said and done, and you have your Ally X turned on, it'll go straight into BIOS. And from there, it's really easy to start the cloud recovery process and getting Windows installed into this SSD. All you have to do is hit Y from the main menu. From there, hit right on the D-pad, and right there, the first thing under the advanced menu is the ASUS Cloud Recovery. What this is going to do is it'll initiate the installation of Windows onto your SSD. Hit A, and from there, a couple of screens will pop up, like, for example, agreeing to some terms and conditions, as well as logging into your Wi-Fi. Depending on how fast your Wi-Fi is will affect how fast things will be installed onto this SSD. One of the funny things that I found on here, but honestly it makes sense, is that it asks whether or not you actually want to back up your files before actually getting everything installed onto your SSD. Because it's a brand new SSD, I don't think that you really need that, but if you had something that was on there, like if you're using one of the SSDs that came on the Ally X and you want to back things up, you can. But for me, because this is a fresh install, I decided not to go ahead and do that and proceed forward with the rest of the recovery. From there, Windows is going to restart and continue installing stuff, restart and continue installing stuff, and there's just going to be a ton of things that are going to be downloaded in order to get things going. But once everything is situated and said and done, it'll start that first boot sequence or that first setup process that you would get whenever you get a new Windows device. Go ahead and go through it just as you normally would if you were getting a new computer or a new laptop. Once everything is set up and installed, I would recommend going into the My ASUS app, Armory Crate, as well as the Windows Update Center, and just update all of the drivers and everything that's there, just to make sure that everything is up to date, no pun intended, but just so things work smoothly. All right, now that everything is said and done with getting Windows up to date, we can start working on creating a partition for Bazzite OS on this SSD. Now I had BitLocker encryption on my SSD, so I had to turn off encryption in order to create that partition. Once I turned off encryption on this SSD, all I had to do was right-click on the start menu icon, go into disk management, and from there, a window will pop up with your SSD itself. Right-click on the SSD, and then from there, you can go into shrink volume. What this will do is it will shrink the actual volume of the SSD or the Windows version of things and create a separate partition. This is where Bazzite OS will live. Now, if by any chance this does not work, you can do the same thing using an app called Disk Genius. I'll have a link down below if that's a better option for you. But the cool thing that I do like about Disk Genius is that it has a visual representation of the actual SSD itself, and is much more intuitive, at least in my opinion. All you have to do is open up the app, make sure that you give it the permission that it needs, right click on the actual partition that's at the top of the window, go into new partition, and from there, there's a visual representation and a slider that you can use to just, pick and choose the size that you want for that partition. So if you want 50-50, 70-30, 80-20, whatever it is that you want for the difference between Windows versus Bazzite OS, then you can do so and create a new partition. From there, all we need to do is create a bootable drive for Bazzite OS. Even though technically you can use the ROG Ally X or Ally to create a bootable device for Bazzite OS, I would recommend using a laptop or a desktop. There's more horsepower, it's a faster process, so you're just better off doing that. But regardless of whatever it is that you're using, I would recommend using Balena Etcher to flash that file onto that USB drive. I'll have a link down in the description below, as well as a link to Bazzite's page to download this file. In order to do that, you just click the download button in the top right hand corner. It'll drag you all the way down to the bottom, and it'll ask what hardware you're using. So you want to pick ASUS ROG Ally or Ally X in this instance, and then when it asks for your desktop environment, I would go with KDE, which is similar to SteamOS, which is what we want out of this entire process. Once you choose that, it'll start downloading the iOS file that you need in order to flash onto that hard drive. If you've never used Balena Etcher, it's actually really easy. All you have to do is go into the system itself, hit flash from file, and from there find and choose your Bazzite ISO file. From there, select your target, and I'm using the ADATA flash drive, so all I gotta do is click that. And then from there, all you have to do is click flash. Now, it will take a little bit of time depending on your computer or your laptop, whatever it is that you're doing. But once it's done flashing, you're going to get a little error icon that pops up. Just hit OK. It might ask you to format it, hit cancel, not a big deal. And then from there, you can eject it and get it ready to use on this installation. Now it's time to install Bazzite OS onto that partition that we created earlier. What you want to do is you want to make sure that that USB drive is inserted into the Ally X as you restart it and go into BIOS. In order to do that, as you're restarting, you want to push down on the volume button. It'll restart and start going into the sequence, and before that bootloader finishes booting into Windows, it'll take you straight into BIOS. Once you're in BIOS, all you have to do is use the Command Center button to bring up the boot menu. That's that button that is right above the D-pad. Once you push that, you're going to have two different options. One option is the Windows Boot Manager, and the other option is the actual USB flash drive. That's where your Bazzite ISO file is. Make sure that you hit that. Once you go into that USB drive, you're going to have three options that pop up. The first one is install Bazzite. The second one is to test this media and install Bazzite deck. And then there's troubleshooting. Now, technically you can test it and it'll run and then install Bazzite, which is the option that I chose. But if you just want to go into installing Bazzite as is, then you're more than welcome to do that as well. Once you go into that boot menu, you're going to see a bunch of code pop up on screen. Don't worry about it. It's just installing the script and everything like that in order to get Bazzite up and running. And then you're going to have an installation menu that pops up for Bazzite. The first thing that you're going to choose is the language that you want the system to run on, as well as the keyboard that's there. After that, you have two main things that you have to worry about in the next menu. First is the installation destination for the files or the OS itself. If you only have one partition that's available, then that's the partition that's going to pop up. I only had one option, so I just chose that. And then after that, you have to create a user, which essentially you need your full name, your username, as well as a password. This password becomes your pseudo password, which you're going to need later on for some installation. So make sure it's one that you remember. And if you ever need to install or change anything else later on that requires it, you're going to need it. So make sure it's one that you definitely remember. Once you have your installation destination and user info put in, you can begin the installation. That button is on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. After that, you're going to have a few minutes before Bazzite's installed, but once it's done, it'll reboot and you're going to be greeted with this blue screen. On the screen, you're going to have a couple of options, but essentially what you want to click on is enroll MOK. After that, you're going to be greeted with view key 0, which is essentially your drive in your boot order, and continue. Hit continue. After that, you want to click yes, and then the password is universal blue, all lowercase and all one word. This is the name of the team behind Bazzite OS. After that, you want to reboot, and this will be the last time that you will be greeted with this screen. There might be a couple of reboots throughout this process, but inevitably what's going to happen is Bazzite OS will start looking online to see if there are any updates for the version of Bazzite OS that you have running or are installing on this handheld. If there's nothing there, then it'll be relatively fast. And then from there, it's going to verify the installation and finally start up that initial boot sequence or that initial setup that you would have with your Steam Deck or any other handheld. Honestly, it's awesome because it boots right into SteamOS, and it's easy to use. You just log in using a QR code or whatever it may be, and that's it. You're kind of just set. The beautiful thing about it is that it just behaves and acts just like a normal Steam Deck. You even have have the same Steam Deck tutorial that you would get with the buttons being in different locations, but regardless of that, it just works and runs like a Steam Deck, but with the power of the Z1 Extreme chipset. Now that the Steam OS version of this handheld is running, I would go straight into the desktop version of it. In order to do that, you're going to hit the menu button or push B from the home menu and go all the way down to power and then go into desktop mode. From there, you will go into the desktop and you'll be greeted with the installation wizard for Bazzite OS. It's pretty easy to go ahead and go into it, but essentially there are a couple of things that I would recommend installing. One is EmuDeck, and then the other one is Decky Loader. Just makes my life easier overall, and that's why my home screen looks a little bit different than Steam Deck or the Bazzite OS home screen by default. After that, I would recommend getting a KDE password or the wallet system that's there. It's just better for encryption overall. It'll ask for a password. I just use the same one that's my pseudo password. It's just easier for me to remember and less passwords for me to get confused about whenever I'm doing things. And then I didn't install anything else, but if you want to install things, then you can do so, but I didn't really see any need for that after that. All right, now that everything is set up with Bazzite OS on the back end as well as the front end, we can go ahead and talk about what's available here. Now, if you have a Steam Deck or you're familiar with one, you know that there's typically a Steam button on this side as well as a quick access menu on this side. Obviously, they're not here, but there are buttons that are here on the sides to kind of replace those via software. Now, if you wanted to access the menu that was here, you would use the Command Center button that you had on Armory Crate in the Windows side of things. So if you push that, you have the same exact settings and layout as you did before with Steam Deck or in SteamOS. And then over here with the Armory Crate button, this will bring up your quick access menu. Now there are a couple of things that are different here in comparison to the version of this that you have on the Steam Deck. For example, because there's a better panel, you get 120 FPS or 120 Hertz refresh rate, and you can enable VRR. Now VRR is one of the best things that I do like about this, because if there are games that don't hit that 60 FPS mark, enabling VRR makes the experience much more enjoyable, and you aren't going to notice that dip in frames as much. Everything else that's here is pretty much on par with what you would see on a Steam Deck. Same thing with like Decky Loader. Because it's installed, you have access to the store and all of the different things that are available for you. Now, if you wanted to change the TDP or some additional options, you can push this Armory Crate button twice. And when you do that, you have this daemon menu that pops up. Now, I was messing with a couple of things here earlier, but essentially the beautiful thing about it is that you have all of these different options that were here, or the operating modes that were here in Armory Crate on the Windows side. So the same TDPs are here, and you can change a custom TDP as well. You can create a custom fan curve, change the colors of the RGB that you want to, different emulation or emulated controls, they're all here. If you wanted to set up a gyroscope in a game, you would want to use the DualSense. And one of my favorite features, one of my biggest gripes that I did have with the original Ally, or with my Ally X in the review that I mentioned, was that this analog stick was too close to the screen. So whenever I was playing games like Baldur's Gate 3, I would accidentally touch the screen when I was moving around, and it would kind of just stop everything as the system or the game swapped over to a keyboard and mouse input, which is what it registered with me touching the screen. Being able to disable the touch screen until the next restart is absolutely phenomenal. I honestly, kudos to Universal Blue because that is so awesome. Now, if you push Y, it'll take you over into a bit more of a detailed menu. For example, if you wanted to change the charge limit to preserve your battery life for a longer lifespan, or for the battery's health overall, then you can do so, as well as moving down and changing different settings for the CPU and the GPU. Mind you, you can do the same thing, or at least something similar, in the quick access menu, but this is here as well. Again, more details in terms of RGB settings, the controllers that are being emulated, as well as the game mode. Some shortcuts are here as well. I personally don't use any of these, but they are here, and I know that some people prefer to have shortcuts over not. And then different settings that are here for like the system, TDP controls, and so on and so forth. Honestly, this is beautiful. It is awesome, and I love the fact that it just runs just as I want it to, because I'm just used to playing on the Steam Deck. So having something like this with the flexibility and ease of use while also still having the option to go into Windows is awesome. What if you wanted to get into Windows? Now, as of right now, with the way that things are set up, the easiest way to do that would be literally to restart your handheld, hold down the volume down button, go into BIOS, go into the boot menu, then pick the right Windows boot manager from the boot menu, and then from there go into Windows. But there's actually an easier way to do that by writing 2 lines of code in Linux terminal. It's very easy. I'll go ahead and show you how to do it. Now, in order to do this, you're going to want to go into the desktop mode again in Bazzite OS, and then go all the way down, open up a terminal window. It'll look like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a .sh or a shell script file. That way, when you open up that file or run that shell script either in Steam on here or in the Steam OS, it'll just initiate the script and restart the handheld and get it into Windows whenever you want. In that terminal window, you're going to type EFI boot mgr. From there, you're going to see all of the different partitions that are there, which are pretty much supposed to be 2, Bazzite OS and Windows. With the Windows, you're going to see the boot 0 number, and it's 0000 for me. It might be 0001 or 02, 03, whatever it is. That last digit in that 4-number sequence is the number that you have to remember. So for me, it's 0. After that, you're going to type in nano windows.sh, and this will create a script. You can name it whatever you want. I just named mine windows.sh. And then from there, you're going to type sudo EFI boot mgr -n and whatever that number was. For me, it was 0, so that's 0. Then on a new line, I'll type in reboot. After that, you're going to hit Control O and then enter, because I'm just going to keep it the name windows.sh. And then from there, hit Control X and then enter to save the script. Back in the terminal, you can type sudo chmod plus whatever the number is /windows.sh to make it run. Finally, we need to actually set up a way to have an exemption for the script to run without a sudo password. In order to do that, you want to see where your EFI boot manager is located at. So you need to type in which EFI boot mgr. For most people, it's in the user sbin, and then boom, it's right there. But if not, you want to remember where it's located. Now you need to type sudo nano /etc/sudo ers.d/sudo-exempt. Now this will create a new file, and here you want to go ahead and put in %wheel all equals root, no password, and then wherever your EFI boot manager is located. Now, if it's different than the one that's mine, just remember where it is, write it down, whatever it may be, and that way you have it right then and there. But after that, hit Control O, then enter, and then Control X and enter to save the script. After that, you're done. All you have to do is now add it into Steam as a non-Steam game. So go ahead and get that set up, but when you scroll through, you won't be able to see it. So you actually have to browse through the file system. And when you hit browse, all you have to do is go into the home folder, which should be the one that you boot into anyways, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you're gonna find windows.sh. From there, you can add any sort of cover art that you want. I mean, you can just Google whatever .png and just use it there. As long as you know that that's the actual game or file that you use to swap over into Windows when you're ready to swap over. And it works magically. I absolutely love this because it makes it so easy to switch from one OS to the other that there really is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the beautiful thing about it is that if you are in Windows and you want to go back into Bazzite, all you really have to do is just reset the handheld and it'll just reset into Bazzite. It's honestly awesome. Now, the beauty of all of this is that if there are some games that only work on Windows that you want to play there, like Destiny 2, for instance, or any of the Xbox Game Pass titles, then you just have to push a button and it'll take you right over into Windows, and that's it. You're gaming and you're going and you don't have anything to worry about. But if you have some games that you would be playing on both Steam as well as Windows, then you kind of have to take into account where they're stored. This is where that microSD card comes into play, because you're able to actually download and install games onto that microSD card and it be legible on both Windows and Linux. It's great because if there are some games that, you know, work on both, you can install them there. But if there are some games that you definitely know that you're going to be playing on the Linux side of things, things, or the Bazzite OS side of things, then you can install that on that partition. Whereas on the Windows side, if there's things that only work on Windows, then you can run them from the SSD itself. Honestly, it's a beautiful setup, and it's so seamless and easy to use that this could very well be the best of both worlds in terms of not only comfort and ease of use, but because of the battery that's there and the longevity of its battery life and the power that's attached to it with the Z1 Extreme chipset, it might just be the Steam Deck 2 that everyone wanted right here in front of us. Accessing those games on Steam, whether or not you're using Bazzite OS or Windows, is relatively easy. All you have to do is go into Steam, the app itself, on either desktop, and then from there you're going to go into Settings, Storage, Internal Drive Options, and then click Add Drive. From there, you'll have the option to add that micro SD card slot. When you choose that, you're gonna get a bunch of games that pop up that are on the card to pop up in your library. It'll take some time for all of those saved data files to sync from the cloud, but once it's done, you can use those games that are there. And like I said earlier, you might need to verify the integrity of some of those games, but for the most part, everything should work as it should. Now, not everything is sunshine and rainbows. There are a couple of things to keep into account when you're doing all of this. First and foremost, you wanna make sure that you have enough time set aside. This took me roughly an afternoon, and I say that because there were some instances where things that were supposed to be fast took longer than they should have, and vice versa. But even after everything is said and done, if you're going to be doing that micro SD card setup where you can play games on that card on both Windows as well as Bazzite OS, make sure that you have plenty of time to download all of those games. I have 500 megabits down in terms of internet speed, and it still took me almost a day to download everything on here before I could actually start playing all of these games. Also, before you start playing in the game, make sure that the Proton that those games are running on are actually the right ones. When I was testing out Portal 2, I ran into issues when I was actually playing the game. It ran like, well, crap. So I looked into the Proton that it was pointing to, and it was using Proton 1.0. So if you want to see which Proton actually works well, I would recommend going to Proton DB. I'll have a link down in the description, and that way you can see which Proton works best based off of community feedback on the games that you want to go ahead and play on here. Now, for me personally, I think that this is the best of both worlds. You're able to play the games on Steam that you want to play, and you can play the games on Bazzite OS that you want to play and not really feel hindered in terms of using one handheld versus the other one. It's honestly great being able to access both systems on here seamlessly without having to worry about anything. Now, obviously, I prefer using Bazzite OS over Windows, but if I needed to go to Windows, I can relatively easily, especially with using that script that's there. But even still, it's genuinely awesome. So what do you guys think of installing Bazzite OS on the ROG Ally X or any of the other handhelds that are out there? Do you think it's worth it, or do you think that it's more of a hassle than it's worth? Let me know down in the comments down below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on things. But if you want to hear my thoughts on the ROG Ally versus the Ally X, then click this video over here. And if you want to hear my thoughts on why I still think the Steam Deck is still the best option for most people, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.